Schizophrenics of Reddit. What is the scariest hallucination visually or audibly that you have ever experienced? Had a patient with Lewy body dementia. Not schizophrenia, but produced horrific hallucinations. I was working night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my office was close to her room. She would scream and scream and scream all night long. I would go and sit with her and ask her if something was scaring her. She saw people waiting in the shadows in the corner of her room. She heard them laughing, saw their faces contorting. She felt rats crawling up and down her body, felt them crawling into her and abuse her, biting her from the inside. She was still pretty with it, and you were able to have lucid conversations with her. Had a sense of humor like you wouldn't believe. She knew what she was experiencing were hallucinations, but that didn't make them any less real to her. Eventually, she stopped being able to discern what was real and what wasn't. She passed a few months ago. I worked with her for 2 years and miss her every day, but I'm grateful that she is no longer suffering. Story 2. Fortunately, the scariest I've ever had is just people calling my name from another room, when I know I'm the only person in the house. My audible hallucinations don't have a great vocabulary, and most of the time just sound like someone doing jazz scat, which is kind of annoying and makes it hard to sleep. Visually, I'll sometimes see people standing in windows who aren't there on a second glance, or small shadows darting around like mice. I'm extremely fortunate that my symptoms are relatively mild. Story 3. First off, I just want to say I have hallucinations categorized as psychosis instead of schizophrenia. They do this when your symptoms don't quite line up with, aren't bad enough for the regular diagnoses. And I can tell you, I have actually pissed myself in fear from some of my hallucinations. I can't even imagine how bad it must be for people whose symptoms line up with schizophrenia. As for my scariest hallucination, it will always be my first visual hallucination. I was in school like 10th grade, and I'd heard voices for a bit now, to the point that I was almost getting used to the fact that I hear things others don't. I remember getting up from my desk to use the toilet, and when I got out of the room, I see this man with no face just standing there facing me. At first, I just thought my eyes were messing with me, so I blink a couple times, shake my head a little bit, and look back, and he's gone. No way he could have moved in those empty, silent hallways without me hearing it, but he's gone. So I just go to the bathroom, thinking it's kind of weird, but not thinking too much about it. I even joked with myself that now I'm seeing things too, haha. But when I got to the bathroom, he's there again, standing in the doorway. I stop and just kind of stare for a second, more curious than anything. Then I think, well, maybe he's just wearing a mask or something. And I ask if he can move over and let me in the bathroom. But then this other kid comes out and asks who I'm talking to, right as he walks through the faceless guy. I just stand there, speechless. Because what do you say in that situation? The kid looks at me like I'm weird, but then just walks away. The dude with no face moves over to let me by, and I give him as wide a berth as I can while I go in, never taking my eyes off him. He followed me into the bathroom, and a few seconds later, this girl walks in, and I begin telling her that she's in the wrong bathroom. I'm a guy FY. When I notice that she doesn't have a face either. They both begin walking towards me, and at that point, I'm pretty damn scared. So I go and hide in one of the stalls and bawl my eyes out. Because at this point, I realize that I'm pretty much just crazy. I didn't come out until the staff came and talked me into it. The two of them, the guy and the girl, show up every now and again. Note, I've since graduated and moved away from there, but they still show up wherever I am. But they never do anything. So I don't know what to make of it, but that first time scared the living crap out of me. Story 4. Schizoaffective bipolar subtype. It's not a specific hallucination, but sometimes I have very vivid memories of things that didn't happen, and they make me second guess every single thing that I can remember or know. Because if my memory failed me once, why wouldn't it fail me twice? And then everything spirals downwards. Story 5. One of the veins in my eye was actually a worm, and that's why I had headaches. Also, random sharp pains and itches are bugs crawling all over my skin, trapped in my shoes, etc. I double-check my shoes every time I put them on with a flashlight, but still have to take them off occasionally to check. Story 6. My friend in college was schizophrenic. We were once hanging out in his dorm room at night, maybe 11 p.m., midnight, and he got up to go to the bathroom. He opened the door and stopped, staring at the empty hallway. He asked me to come to the door and tell him if something seemed weird. I walk up to the door and see nothing strange in the hall and tell him so. He asks me if I can hear something. I say no. He said he heard muffled crying or arguing or something coming from down the hall, and he saw a pitch-black hallway when it was actually fully lit. He said the hall was black, not just dark or dimly lit. At this point, he is shaking, and I'm terrified because I don't know he's sick. We're both on the verge of tears. I'm not even sure he knew he was sick at the time. I ended up walking him to the bathroom and then spending the night in his room because he could still hear someone crying in the hall. I thought for the longest time he was pulling my leg, but he ended up going to therapy and getting on meds very shortly after that night, so it was a terrifying and very real moment for him too. Story 7? I had a patient with schizophrenia, full visual and auditory hallucinations, off of his meds and screaming in public. Demons were coming out of the ground trying to grab him. They were yelling at him various obscene things. Weird part was that once we were on scene, he calmed down and recognized the uniforms, fully cooperative. But that was an interesting patient history. Are you having hallucinations? Yep, describes them in detail. So how are you so calm right now? This is normal when I'm off my meds and I know I'm in an ambulance. This was normal for him. Story 8. I have psychosis, and it usually is worst when I'm alone or at night. Doubly so if I'm alone at night. When I was house training my puppy, I had him outside at 3 a.m., and I saw what looked like the KKK and some witches having a seance. I then heard whispers mentioning hitting, and saw the group start walking up the street towards my house. Thankfully, that's the worst it's ever been. I do still have minor fleeting hallucinations when I'm stressed, but it's more like seeing a shadow out of the corner of my eye and is much easier to ignore. Story 9. Snipers. One Friday evening, I was watching TV and happened to be playing with a flashlight that I'd left on the coffee table. Boom! Next thing you know, I'm in a full-blown hallucination. I heard a special forces team out the window as they were sneaking out of my backyard. I flashed the light around the room, and they got quiet, and they misunderstood my intent. They thought the light was mounted on a rifle. Next thing you know, they're calling me outside as part of a SWAT response, and I'm on my hands and knees on my porch in the dead of night, asking them to please not shoot me. I must have stayed out there about 2 hours with my hands locked behind my head as the snipers got more and more nervous about what I might do. Eventually, they decided that there was no way to defuse the situation, and they hit me. I spent about 5 minutes laying pass on my front porch, then crawled inside my house to die. I phoned my mom to let her know that I'd been hit and that special forces had hitting me. Needless to say, she wasn't buying it and talked me down to earth a little bit, but that wasn't the end of it. She had me go to the ear and stayed with me on the phone until I got there. I'm still in full-blown hallucination mode. So while I'm waiting in the air, I hear the leader of the Special Forces unit chatting with the front desk nurse. He knows that I'm there and is coming to get me. Luckily, the doctor found me first and didn't really know what to do with me, so he gave me substances and discharged me. So I drive home, still hallucinating and now somewhat high, and I see all types of crazy stuff on the way home. Once I get home, the Ativan mellows the hallucinations into something enjoyable, and I spend the rest of the weekend with playful hallucinations. I can't really describe the fear of having special forces snipers aiming at you for 2 hours straight. Story 10. I'm not schizophrenic, but I get psychotic episodes. My hallucinations tend to stick to one sense, but sometimes kind of bleed into each other. I often hallucinate bugs on surfaces that aren't there, as I try to squish them without anything happening. I suppose the scariest one was a body lying on the floor of my bedroom, and it was wheezing. For me, each sense has a different impact when I hallucinate something. Hearing something is extremely distracting and annoying, but isn't scary anymore. Seeing something usually spikes my fear response, as well as tactile hallucinations. It's never happened before that a hallucination was occupying all of my senses at the same time. I'm not sure if I could handle that. Story 11. Somebody I knew back in high school had schizophrenia, but was taking medication for it. She accidentally skipped a dose once, and she came to school hysterical that she didn't want to go back home because she heard someone chewing meat under her bed. Story 12. Brother is schizophrenic and had insane hallucinations for about a year before I could get him help. He constantly believed people were assaulting him, trying to abuse him and trying to hit him. On one occasion, he ran so long to get away from them, he was admitted into the hospital for heat exhaustion. He didn't understand why we wouldn't help him and would lash out at us. He's now severely medicated and nowhere near the person he once was. Story 13. I'm schizoaffective. I attempted death 2 years ago. While I was in recovery, not in a psych ward, but actually still being hospitalized, I was having a hard time staying awake for any period of time. I woke up at one point and realized there was a freakishly tall person in a black suit standing next to my bed, leaning over me. I got this horrific sense of dread, like I was about to die, and I knew he had come for me. I looked up at his face, and it had no features, like Slender Man. I closed my eyes and screamed as loud as I could, calling in the nurses who had to fight to get me to calm down. Part of me still wonders if it was a Reaper that had come to take my soul. Story 14. My mom worked at a placement home for high-functioning mentally ill people. Occasionally, they would go off their meds and start the cycle down into their illness again. One woman called screaming because there were demons in her shoes. If she put her shoes on, they would crawl into her feet by going under her toenails and then invade her body from the legs up. Story 15. Not a schizophrenic, but I hallucinated a fair bit as a teen and still sometimes now. Unsure of the triggers for them. It just happens sometimes, no substances involved. The most unnerving thing I've seen was a creature, as tall as the inside of a house, stooped over on my neighbor's veranda. It looked like a person, but stretched out. Hollow face, eyes, just staring at me. I would look away for a minute and then back, and it was still staring, just watching. I was 16 years old at the time, and I'd see smaller versions of these guys everywhere. But this one was huge and refused to go. Eventually, I fell asleep, and he wasn't there when I woke back up. Story 16. At least for me, the delusions are far scarier than the hallucinations. Insects and shadow goblins are freaky, but not as bad as being convinced that your loved ones are all passing, or that the government is following you. Story 17. Primarily auditory hallucinations here. Once experienced the onset of an episode during which one of my familiar voices cried for help through direct interaction with me, and continued to let out tortured cries the entire time until I was heavily sedated. Came to approximately a day later, and I haven't heard from him since. I've experienced darker and objectively more disturbing content from them, but hearing one of them cry for help as it passed was one of the hardest hallucinations I've experienced. I'm schizophrenic. Story 18. Hey, finally a question I can answer. I have voices that tell me they're necromancers trying to steal my soul and take over my body. They try to convince me they're real people all day, every day. The scariest time was when my heart was beating incredibly fast, and they told me that they had control of my heart and were going to speed it up until they hit me. At one point, I totally believed they were real, but I don't anymore. I proved them to be just voices with logic thanks to some help from the internet. Story 19. I only have psychosis. So not full schizophrenia, but I still have hallucinations and delusions. I'm a woman, and to be honest, both of my worst ones are pretty unbelievable because they sound so unusual compared to what you usually hear about in the media, etc. My worst hallucinations have actually been tactile, touch-based. So not quite what you're looking for, but there's a visual one also at the end, which was very scary at the time. Tactile. I get this a few times a year, but 2016 was the worst. They began in 2014, where something invisible would climb into bed with me and spoon me. It progressed from there, and it got a lot more handsy, but a round of antipsychotics got rid on them. In 2016, Iz came back majorly. I don't want to say it had sex with me, because it's a hallucination. It's not real, and there was definitely nothing visual, but something did happen. It only happened once, but for the next few days, it would begin to touch me outside of my bedroom and during the day. One time, it pinned me against the sink while I was washing dishes. Kind of felt like a power play, almost like it's saying, look what I can do, I can get you anywhere I want. Scary crap. Another round of antipsychotics got rid of it. I'm dreading the next flare-up. Visual one night walking home from class at university, I was hit by a sudden dizzy spell that made my vision distort a bit. Then it felt like I was being pulled to look to the other side of the road, where the woods was. There stood Slender Man. Needless to say, I instantly ran back to the house without looking back and didn't sleep that night. This one was probably the first thing that made me realize something wasn't quite right. The tactile stuff started when I returned home at the end of the school year. The Slender Man stabbing case happened shortly after this hallucination, actually. I think it might have even been the same year, strangely enough. Story 20. No diagnosis here, but I've been suffering from constant delusions, paranoia, and hallucinations for the past 2 years. The scariest hallucination I've ever had took place in a Target. I was in the canned food aisle when I saw a little girl grab a can. There was nothing particularly unusual about it. I, at first, figured it was just a girl getting something off the shelf for her mom. But then, after a while of standing with the can in her hands in silence, she turned around and stared at me with her empty eye sockets. She opened the can and started chasing me around the store with the can top. They're really sharp. And I started running through the store to escape. I know it's stupid, but it felt really real. Anyway, I ended up tripping, and the next thing I knew, she handed me the can top and was controlling my arms. I felt myself hit my neck and was basically screaming. But then I knocked myself out of it. When I came to, I was just standing staring at the cans with tears streaming down my face. It's the most vivid hallucination I've ever had, and much scarier than the ones I have every day. Story 21. Not schizophrenic, but I'm bipolar, and was investigated for schizophrenia while they were trying to diagnose me due to hallucinations. I initially heard what I thought was a broken radio both in my home and car for about 6 months. I had just moved house with my then-boyfriend, and therefore was quick to dismiss noises I didn't recognize. However, I began to be 100% convinced that a couple were living in the garage and wanted to hurt me. I refused to ever go into the garage. The one time I did with my so. He noted a door was open, and I sprinted away with the torch and was midway texting his mom that he was probably past when he came back in, reasonably pissed. A few months later, I had the scariest night of my life. I had just broken up with Above-So for various reasons, but somewhat including absolute paranoia and panic. Having just told him it was over, I went to the bathroom to cry. I looked down, and my entire body was covered in spiders. I freaked. Couldn't turn to him for help, obviously, so went back to the spare room. An hour after that, I heard 2 voices, about 20 centimeters behind me over my right shoulder, in unison growl, "It's coming." Startled, I look up to see a black, tall figure in the corner of the room. Imagine the same shape as a really tall Queen's Guard and very evil. At this point, I ran out of the room back to my so, who understandably kicked me back out. He had since apologized and didn't know what was going on, just I was acting crazy. I left the next day for 2 months. Moved back when my so left and have been happy without many incidences since. I often describe bipolar as having small tasters of other mental disabilities, but the luck of only having them temporarily. My pet psychiatrists all initially thought I had schizophrenia when I was first admitted. And if what I experienced was half as bad as the actual disease, I am eternally grateful I'm not. Story 22. My great-grandmother passed because of her hallucinations. I was not alive then, but she apparently was not given the appropriate care and ended up living on her own. She locked herself in her house and was found dead weeks later. She apparently had thought people were out to hit her, so she armed herself and was so scared she didn't move. I'm assuming until she passed. She was found with her legs basically pickled from the amount of time she wet and crap herself, and had downed quiet a few bottles of whiskey. When her house was cleaned and sorted through, they also found dozens of stolen purses, with literally nothing taken from them. To me, that is the most terrifying way to end. My cousin, who is my age, also has it. She frequently believes that she is more than human and has to go back to the hospital frequently from psychotic episodes. From what I glean, she hears spirits and occasionally sees them. She also has so many death attempts, it breaks my heart. It's hard to get close to her because, again, she sometimes thinks she is beyond human. When she is in that state, although not scared in any sort, she alienates herself to the point of death tendencies. I'm glad modern days we have more of a solution for her. I don't want her to end up like our great-grandmother. I fear occasionally that I may have symptoms of it, but not to that extent. It's mostly during manic swings of my bipolar that I hear things and see things. I've never directly seen anything other than motion from the corners of my eyes, and I just hear inaudible whispers. But when it happens, it comes with a massive, overwhelming fear of impending doom, which is the scary part. Hearing whispers is okay. Hearing whispers and being confident that you are about to pass. That adds a layer of terror to the whispers. To be honest, what I should do is stop smoking weed and eating mushrooms and playing woot psychedelics, knowing full well that this demon is in my possible genetics. Story 23. Lawyer who represented the mentally ill. I had a client in his early 20s who refused to open his eyes. He would keep them shut tight no matter what. The reality he saw was so overwhelming. Many people with mental illness have issues with their eyes, so much so that it leads to self-harm. One patient used 2 aerosol spray, can 2 make blowtorches, and burned out his eyes. Now imagine the terror that you would have to perceive to make you take such an action. Story 24. Before I was ever diagnosed with anything, I started hearing my name whispered. It started only happening when I was vacuuming, then eventually started happening at random times. Scared the crap out of me until I realized that it's in my head and not someone watching. It's since progressed to full audio hallucinations, full sentences, and occasional visual hallucinations. I don't sit here thinking that these things are real. I know what I hear isn't real. I know what I occasionally see isn't real. The only time it ever affects me negatively these days is when I sometimes see someone out of the corner of my eye through the door while I'm at my desk. Then I end up having to do a sweep of the house with my gun. I always know I won't ever find anyone, but just to be safe, I make sure. I should probably clarify that this is only talking about hallucinations. But I'm paranoid schizophrenic. The hallucinations don't bother me, but the paranoia does. Sometimes it'll start seeming like everything in my life is going wrong at once. I'll see patterns in people's behavior that I shouldn't be seeing and start thinking that everyone's in on it. Everyone's against me, and they're all laughing. They just want to see how far they can push me before I finally hang myself, which I did try. Like The Truman Show, but if it were a comedy, and the only funny part about it is seeing me live a life on misery at the hands of everyone else. The paranoia used to really duck my crap up. I'd hide in my house and refuse to talk to anyone at all because I knew they were all in on it. It really was awful and hasn't happened in a really long time, but it's gotten a lot better. Instead of hiding for days, I'd just hide long enough to be able to sleep and forget about everything. But again, hasn't happened in a long time. Just harmless hallucinations now. Story 25. A demon appeared on a door on my balcony and said, "You can't help me. No one can help me." When I went inside, it moved up the wall onto the ceiling and said that it was coming back in 2 minutes to take me to hell. I started feeling a pulsing move up my left arm, which led me to think I was going to have a heart attack. It came back, and I was so scared that I ran out of my apartment. What followed was a situation that lasted in real life only about 2 days. But the timeline in the delusion lasted 6 months. At some point during the night, the cops tased me about 10 miles from the house, and my heart ended up stopping. In the delusion, the demon had captured me and taken me to hell. In real life, I was in someone's backyard trying to hit myself. Apparently, the owner of the house tried to shoot me with a shotgun but missed. At some point, I was too tired in the delusion and fell to the ground. The demon continually told me that this was only going to get worse if I didn't continue. I had no energy, so I gave up. The only thought I had for this entire delusion was, I am never getting out of here. No thoughts of my family or the past, just endless despair about never getting out. Eventually, I got close enough, and when my fingers touched the glass, I was transported to another place. It was a void where there stood a massive black dragon with bright green eyes. The undersides of his wings were the same bright green. He moved his head towards me, which was about 3 times the size of my entire body, and whispered, "It's only going to get worse from here." Then he spewed a black smoke from his nostrils that entered my ear. The next thing I experienced can only be described like this. Imagine having 5,000 copies of yourself that are all having the most intense, mind-splitting migraine that you could never imagine. But all those minds are happening inside of your mind. I lost all sense of existence in the pain. Then I was in space staring at the earth, and in my own voice I heard the words, "You created all of this." Then I woke up and was strapped into a hospital bed in the ICU. I looked like someone had dragged me behind a car naked, just covered in gashes and wounds. For a long time, I was completely traumatized. But those last words actually have changed my entire life. I know now that my entire reality is created by my mind, and knowing that I no longer fear anything. I think that when people die, they release a huge amount of DMT, which causes a time-dilated dream state, depending on what you were thinking beforehand, in my case, going to hell. That is exactly what happens. From the time I saw the demon to when I woke up, only 2 days went by, but I was in hell for 6 months. I have one more story that happened more recently, and I'll put it here if anyone wants to hear it. Story 26. Not officially diagnosed with schizophrenia or anything to do with hallucinations, but I do frequently have hallucinations. I should probably see somebody, but they aren't getting in the way of me doing anything, so meh. When I talked to my counselor so many years ago, she said that as long as they aren't asking me to do anything, they aren't a big deal. So I feel like there's a dividing line between people with hallucinations and people with hallucinations that actually talk, interact with them. Most of the hallucinations I have involve spiders crawling on my walls. Sometimes I'll look over, and there'll just be a giant spider, or thousands of tiny spiders crawling along my wall. Sometimes there'll be one regular-sized spider in the corner, with a maze of webs surrounding it. It typically happens at night while I'm in bed, or shortly after I wake up, which leads me to believe it's related to some sleeping thing. Another frequent one I get is a specific series of knocks on my bedroom door. At first, the hallucinations freaked me right the duck out. Giant spiders on my wall, duck that. But over time, I've started to be able to recognize the difference between reality and my hallucinations. The problem is that while I can logically tell the difference and understand that what I'm seeing isn't real, I can still see it. My brain still says, yo, there's a thingy here. You got to deal with it. And that's what's scary to me. These hallucinations are so real that they overwhelm any logic or reason that I know I have. They make me do things that I wouldn't otherwise be doing. If I heard somebody knock on my door right now, I would go open it. Even if I know there's nobody on the other side of the door, I would still get up and open it, and that's terrifying to me. Why would I open my door for somebody if I know that somebody doesn't exist? Why would I get up and grab the bug spray if I know the bugs don't exist? It makes me feel like I don't have control of my own life, of my own self, and that's infinitely more scary than any hallucination I've ever had. Story 27. My girlfriend worked with some extreme cases for a while. One woman, whose schizophrenia was brought on by trauma, frequently saw and smelt human beings being burned alive, usually babies and children. That's because that's one of the things she saw in real life, which resulted in the schizophrenia. All of the ladies she worked with and were horribly institutionalized, but now lived in a nice assisted living facility, were well medicated and got to live independently as possible, but damn, that woman had some horrible things happen to her. Story 28. Our projector is connected to our phones or computers while we watch stuff. The channel changed, and 2 Asian women appeared on screen, wearing white ID devices around their necks, and told me they were watching The Smartest People and started chatting with me. This is after my fiancé went to bed. One was wearing a blue shirt, the other a red shirt, and I lost my damn mind. That was the serious beginning of my first psychotic break that lasted for weeks while I thought people were monitoring me. Things like the computer going to its own web pages, the mouse moving on its own with nothing attached like a mouse, highlighting words like guide and help, and zooming in and out over and over again until I progressively got worse. It happened in front of my fiancée, and she asked what was wrong with my computer, and I ended up slamming my foot into it because I just couldn't handle it. It's been over a year, and it's still like I'm being followed and people are listening in. I get messages in my music as though the song names are directed towards me when I do Spotify radio playlists. I'm now heavily medicated and it's just mild, but I'll never feel like I'm not being watched or followed again. It doesn't help that my dad built spy software for the US government. It was originally to hunt terrorists, but I'm sure it helped turn into what it is today stateside. Psychotic breaks are no damn joke, and you could polygraph me and I would be telling the truth that all of that stuff happened. It progressed to full-blown paranoia where I saw messages in the colors of cars passing by the house, airplanes passing over, and even distrusting my fiancé that was one of them. I've had voices at movie theaters say things like once they're in, and it was a good ethics lessons on what they did, and then they listed the current novel I was writing to try and get off disability and make a living again, and had people ask me about what my dad did, and just all sorts of family history that went back years. I still have trouble leaving the house because they think my psychosis is tied to my anxiety now, and I'm medicated for that with mild benzos, which are stunning at letting me leave my house for 20 minutes to go to the local cafe and get a drink. But it's hard. It's always hard leaving my house, and I hate it. The people that follow me also called me a savant, perfect score on an IQ battery for mathematical ability. And just talking about my fiancé and other stuff that really throws me for a loop. But I'm happy enough besides the mental issue. I've got muscular dystrophy as well, and I'm writing books and a comic at Million Words, where I write about having all my conditions growing up like schizoaffective disorder, AD, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, and high-functioning autism. I'm just glad I'm not too sick yet, and hope to one day make a living from writing books and this comic so I can provide for my family again like a real person. Story 29. I started to suffer from hallucinations in high school. Considering I had never had a reason to question my mental soundness, I just perceived everything I heard as real. It also helped that I was raised Catholic, and as such had underlying beliefs on the existence of demons and such. It really started as just hearing faint whispers in the background. I always thought it was just part of my conscious, expressing like different thoughts I was not actively thinking over. It started as hearing whispers that made me feel I was outcast, that my friends were against me, and I was alone and isolated. As absurd as it is to say this, after hearing that for a while, I began to believe it. It completely altered my behavior, and I began to doubt all my friends and seclude myself from them as I thought they were conspiring against me or faking sentiment. I used that to explain how hallucinations affected me. Now, the scariest thing I heard, after maybe a year of not expressing concern about these whispers, it got worse. Being much more isolated, there was weeks when I barely spoke to anyone at all, as I fully believed I was hated by everyone I knew. During these weeks, all I had were the whispers, which I'd come to respect as I thought it was my own thoughts, communicating aspects of life I could not actively see. The whispers then suddenly shifted to voices that were inhuman, booming, bone-chilling, and commanding. They told me they were beings of different nature, a higher one, and that they now had me under their ownership. They expressed that I was a pawn to them, but that me being an outcast made them sympathetic to me. I was told that I needed to be put back into society, and the only way to do it was to take care of the people who didn't like me. The hateful sentiment was logically coming from my former crush, and by hitting her, I would remove the person spreading negative thought about me. Now at the time, I was only hiding myself from society, but still had my bearings. So I thought that these suggestions from these beings was just wrong. However, like the example I started with, after hearing it over and over again, it began to make some sort of sense. Being alone as an extrovert, I was desperate to feel safe amongst people again, and while I never recall being enthusiastic about it, I saw hurting this girl as a necessary evil. I had a plan and everything, but when the time came, I had sent her a weird text that concerned her, and she called a hospital and expressed her concern regarding my mentality. And luckily, an ambulance and a police officer got to my house moments before I left my house, knife in hand. So yeah, reflecting on that after treatment, that is the scariest experience I ever had. Sorry if this is poorly wrote. I just blurred on my keyboard and hit the important parts in all of a couple minutes. But hopefully it's a unique perspective on the matter. Story 30. Just for future reference to any people dealing with people that suffer from hallucinations, there are a few things you can do when you're around them to help them out in general. Do not call for them from another room. Make eye contact when you're chatting with them. Remember that hallucinations involve any of the senses. Some people are more prone to auditory hallucinations than visual hallucinations. So just act sensibly and try not to provoke them. I'd like to go into more detail about this. Often people suffering from schizophrenia have to develop their senses for analyzing themselves and figuring out what is real versus what is hallucinatory. Other things they do is look at other people's reactions to confirm their senses, or they take longer to answer questions by asking you to repeat or waiting for you to prompt them for an answer. Some qualities of hallucinations differ and are not present in other sensory modalities. Auditory hallucinations can appear louder, softer, more or less clear than the environment they are occurring in. Maybe they have other effects like echoing or distortion, things that would not be present in their environment. Visual hallucinations are often said to be easier to distinguish but difficult to dismiss. Often they can be unsettling, persecutory, and make someone feel at risk, but not always. Alcoholics have certain visual hallucinations associated with them, which are called Lilliputian hallucinations, in which they see little people. Also check out Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Olfactory and tactile hallucinations are less common but do occur and can be really unsettling. I feel like most patients encounter these ones at night, usually really uncomfortable smells like gas leaks or burning smells, and it can be really annoying, and time costly as you wonder if the odor is real and pray your house is not burning down. Tactile hallucinations can occur nightly and make it really difficult to fall asleep. It's really hard to ignore being touched. This hallucination can often accompany delusions. Story 31. Not me, but a man I know. He told me that he was walking his bike past Goodwill and a group of teens bumped him and stole his wallet, then kidnapped him. All of the teens were celebrities, but he didn't know their names. They took him to the Flatiron Building in Seattle and spoke to him in the Tlingit Haida language, Alaskan Indian tribes, keeping him for weeks and implanting an organic computer in his brain, so now he doesn't have to show ID when he goes to the casino. After that, he went to Vegas, and a demon took his hand and forced him down a dark hallway into a manhole in the street, with a door below that he knew led to hell, for which he blamed himself since he'd chosen to visit Sin City. I felt awful for him as he recounted all of this, and he was terrified about the Vegas part. Hoping to get through, I asked gently, "Now, you know none of that really happened, right?" And he just stared at me in confusion, because of course to him, it all did indeed. Story 32. Obligatory, not schizophrenic, but I've had hallucinations from bipolar. You mentioned visual and auditory hallucinations, but tactile hallucinations are terrifying. Bugs crawling on your skin all night, being tapped on the shoulder, someone breathing on the back of your neck. Crap's awful. The scariest auditory hallucination I've had was someone breathing under my bed. Luckily, I had insight. Basically, I could hear it, but I knew it was a hallucination, so I didn't, start to try to hit the person under my bed. But God, I was sitting paralyzed in my bed all night. Story 33. Schizoaffective and bipolar. 1. I've had a lot of mild to somewhat severe ones when I was undiagnosed. Stopped taking my meds, so I'll only highlight the 2 worst episodes. My first visual one was when I was 14 and undiagnosed. I was up late talking on the phone with a friend when I hear tapping on my window. I look over, and there is a completely glowing white hand making weird hand gestures and grabbing at the air. I freaked out and ran downstairs to tell my parents someone is breaking into our house. Here's the kicker. My bedroom was on the 3rd story. My dad went out to investigate regardless, but they just brushed it off as a bad dream. I also have night terrors. When I came back into my room, things were quiet for a while, but about an hour later, the hand was back. But this time, it was flailing around like its body was being violently shaken, just horribly shaking, waving around. I slept in the bathroom that night, needless to say. Months later, I was diagnosed schizoaffective and bipolar 1. I thought back to that night and realized it was a hallucination. Story 34. Not me, but my ex-boyfriend. He was diagnosed at a very young age, but never medicated. Doctors claimed it wasn't severe enough to medicate, and he would probably grow out of it. He said his first hallucinations were auditory, just people calling his name. He'd be in a crowd and hear a voice very close say his name and would turn around and there was no one there. He was always reluctant to discuss his visual hallucinations. I think the whole topic made him insecure. But once when he was a child, he saw dead people digging themselves out of the ground. He said he wasn't scared by it because he was old enough to know they were hallucinations. Once I asked him what his most vivid hallucinations were. He said he was driving and began to see hundreds of white rabbits run out into the road. When cars hit them, the rabbits would turn into smoke. He said it was a very long hallucination that lasted for quite a few miles. He never fully grew out of it. Once or twice he would mention the twinkles when we were together. He would see tiny twinkling lights everywhere. Sounded kind of nice. Story 35. Medicated paranoid schizophrenic here. Out of all the various recurring, excruciating delusions of pain, death, and extreme paranoia, few have come to scare me as much as this one. Buckle up, folks. I'm awoken. The night sky illuminated by a half moon. Outside my window, possibly a reflection, a face looks back at me. Bearded, helmeted, looks kind of like those biker zombies from 7 Days to Die, to give a better picture. The face contorts and twists and turns and goes inside out, then back to normal. Looks like it's laughing now, starts moving towards me, through the window. Now inside my bedroom, not 3 solid turds from my face, laughing. I scream silently, too afraid to make a sound, to even blink. In a rare moment of clarity, I start praying to Jesus. The face then loses its face, becomes a skull, a ghetized mix of human and cow that is hard to describe with words. It had horns. It was horrifying. I knew I was going to end. This laughing skull was going to hit me. In a final act of malice, it crept towards me, staring deeper and deeper into my eyes, further shredding and searing my soul with its pure hatred. I closed my eyes for the first time in ages, and when I opened them, it was gone. Looking around, my alarm clock displayed 3:04 a.m., the half moon a sideways frown, reminding me that I was in danger, that the skull, the face, it was sent here to hurt and hit me. I didn't sleep again for another 2 days, and even then, I had almost collapsed from exhaustion. That's the end of that memory. As painful as it is to relive, it is important because it reminds me if why I take my meds, to never be afraid of things like that again. Story 36. Hey everyone, schizophrenic here. I'd rather not specify a specific type. I'm diagnosed with the paranoid kind, but I do show symptoms of a few other types from what I can tell. Either way, my scariest hallucinations are the ones that make me feel like the fabric of space-time is ripping. I have a few that fall into that category. The most common one, which scares the crap out of me, is when I can see individual cells disappearing from existence, popping like balloons, not being replaced by new ones. I feel as though reality itself is dissolving and becoming a liquid substance of sorts. It's as if everything is kind of magnified. I see much clearer when this is happening, which is unusual since my medication tends to blur my vision. Another less common one is feeling like everything in the universe is being drawn towards me involuntarily, being absorbed by my body and being unable to ever leave. I basically feel like I'm non-figuratively a black hole, which is terrifying and sad and oddly serene at the same time. Story 37. I have been treated for schizoaffective disorder for most of my life, with a presented family history. I take an antipsychotic and a mood stabilizer multiple times daily, hoping that qualifies me for this thread. I live in a sleepy town, and in a particularly close subsection of the town where everyone knows everyone. I woke up one morning and felt quite fine, drank my morning coffee, and walked to the door to let my cat out. As I closed the door, I saw a rather large man with no shirt on run full speed into my neighbor's backyard, and he disappeared behind my neighbor's house. Obviously, this set off a panic in me. Why was he running? What's he doing in Brad's backyard at 7 a.m. half naked? The problem with delusions and hallucinations is that during one, you are so sure they are real, there's no doubt in your mind. And thus, no matter how outlandish the idea of some random person trespassing with no shirt on seems to you. And at the time, I was hell-bent and determined to find out who this guy was. The police arrested me in Brad's backyard, screaming and ranting in boxers and a bathrobe that a man that doesn't exist was there doing exactly what I was now doing. I know you were probably hoping for horror stories or tales of imagining ghosts or dragons, but real horror is seeing your entire town watch you get carried away as a loony all when you thought you were helping the community. My greatest fear is not some uninspired monster, but rather that one day I won't know what's real anymore. Story 38. I don't have schizophrenia, but I have experienced some really scary hallucinations before. I do have bipolar disorder, and when I used to drink too much, I would hear weird voices, noises at night while I was trying to go to sleep. When I closed my eyes, a very disturbing slideshow started to play in my head of different images of people. After I stopped drinking, I tried smoking. Turns out that was a terrible idea. I became extremely paranoid, and one night heard a noise in my house that made me convinced an intruder was inside. I calmly told myself that wasn't true, but I was still scared out of my mind. When I tried to go to sleep, I started hearing this loud screeching, squeaking noise coming from the corner of my room. I also had visual hallucinations. I have a poster of Jimi Hendrix in my room, and I hallucinated that he was morphing out of the poster and coming into real life. Before you guys say the substances was bad, it was medical that I got from my GF's cousin. So no, it was not dipped in PC or anything like that. Not super scary, but I've also hallucinated that there was a big black chicken running down the street. And one time woke up to a chorus of women singing the words, "I will double," over and over again. Also, sometimes I've experienced weird paranoia that there is someone behind me, and when standing in line at 711 or at fast food restaurants. I have believed there was someone behind me in line, but when I turned around, there was nobody there. I've also had some pretty gnarly nightmares over the last few years, but that's a different story. Just last night, I had a dream about being hit in the leg by a stray bullet from a police shooting, so that gives you some idea about what my dreams are like. One of the things that makes hallucinations scary is that you don't know what else will happen. My greatest fear was that I would hear someone opening my door or talking to me and telling me to do things. When you have one hallucination, you think, what's next? It's like a horror movie that you can't get out of. Story 39. Paranoid schizophrenia here. My scary visions are usually in the early morning, but one time at around 2 p.m., I was standing in front of my vanity mirror applying makeup for the day. I started to hear the running of feet. Figuring it was my roommate at the time, I thought nothing of it. It wasn't. All of a sudden, a figure busts in my room. If I had to think of a video game enemy that it looked like, I would say the cowman from the forest. That was my first visual hallucination, and afterwards I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my husband came home from work. Story 40. I have mixed state bipolar Asperger's, which sometimes has gone on to full-blown psychosis. It's difficult to separate the things which are hallucinations and which are synesthesia, but either way, the effect can be scary. For example, once on the ground floor of a hotel, I heard piano music coming from the lounge. But as I got closer and closer, the music turned into what it really was, which was a guitar and drums. I hear human voices in static, like the white noise of any computer. Even a light bulb that is loud enough for me to hear it will sound like two people arguing. When I close my eyes, I see fractals and kaleidoscope imagery until it fades to black, and I begin to see flashbulb images of things I saw since I last slept. When I hear certain sounds, I get mental images, colors, shapes, emotions. When I was in early stages of psychosis, I heard a commercial for Windows 10. I whipped off my feet like Charlie Brown and started screaming. Because the sound effect they played in the beginning of the commercial made me see 7 blinding lights that looked like they were going to crash into me. There is lower-level hallucination type stuff, like being convinced every man on Earth is trying to hit me, or taking a sign that said exit to lobby with a pointing arrow to mean something more like please leave the building before attempting to lobby for anything, wherein lobby means to make an argument, leaving me mute while I could still see the sign. Story 41. I'm not schizophrenic, but my partner has schizoaffective disorder and doesn't mind me posting here. The creepiest thing he has told me about would be the shadow people that he used to see. He doesn't see them anymore, but when he was a child, he would see them floating over the top of people like his mom and stepdad, or they would pop their heads around the corner. He says they wear like floating people, but made out of darkness, or like black smoke. He said most of the time they ignored him, but once his mom was in the kitchen making food, and when he went in, one was over the top of her and then turned its head to look at him. It's so creepy and makes me sad thinking about my boyfriend having to feel so scared all the time as a small child. Story 42. My grandma had schizophrenia her whole life, but never said peep about it until she was in her deathbed. Apparently, from time she was 3 years old to 80, she had animals with human faces scream profanities at her. She also had a little man who lived in her purse and stole her money. Story 43. I've had a reoccurring figure since my episodes first started. When I was younger, I would hear brief whispered statements like, hey, or look. The first time this specific voice turned into a visual sensation, I was around 13 years old. I was reading in bed and I heard a whisper saying stop that kept repeating louder and louder to the point of screaming. Slowly coming into my field of vision was a woman in a white robe, a disfigured, bloody old face and mangled hair. When she was fully there, the screaming stopped. It felt like an eternity of being unable to look away because I was petrified. My eyes just kept watering. After a few minutes, I was able to snap out of the trance and she was gone. I've struggled with other episodes, but this is one of my few reoccurring terrors. In school, she would appear in class. I'd be out with my friends, and she'd be in the road. I'd be at work, and she's just there. It's caused issues in relationships because I have a hard time admitting I go through with this. A month ago, I was visiting my ex-girlfriend at her dorm, and I woke up paralyzed with fear because I was experiencing an episode but couldn't reach out for help. Sometimes I worry that I'll have to deal with this alone until I can't handle the dread anymore. Story 44. I'm in charge of a program at a mental health agency that serves people with chronic mental health disorders such as schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, and many more mental health diagnoses. We run group homes in which these individuals can live and work on skills to be as productive in their community and lives as they are able. The clients we serve are the most chronic in terms of their diagnoses and have severe and persistent symptoms. I have worked with clients that consistently see images in doors and mirrors in which they are slitting their own throat, have paranoid hallucinations in which they believe a hospital planted a brain, controlling and listening device in their brain, because he knew that this doctor hit the client's own cousin, and many more horrifying symptoms. On a lighter note, a gentleman we provide services to consistently hallucinates that he runs a strip club, and he interacts with the hallucinatory escorts by yelling at them to, "Get back on the pole, idiot!" and other colorful demands. Story 45. I have a sibling that was diagnosed with schizophrenia when she turned 18. It was pretty bad for my family, especially my mom, because we had no idea it was even a thing that existed. Basically, the last 10 years, she's been in and out of mental health centers. Usually, when she has episodes, she hallucinates that my mother is sleeping with her boyfriend, doesn't have one, and she can hear then having sex through the wall, and when that happens, she gets really violent and tries to basically hit our mom. What really amazes and confuses me is that a lot of people are here that have the mental illness, and they know they have it and are aware that what they experienced was not real, even if they realized it later. My sibling says that nothing is wrong with her and we just hate her and want her to stay locked in a mental health center. She has hallucinated voices talking to her from a radio and really weird things like sharks living in her stomach. Again, I always wonder how come my sibling never acknowledges that she has schizophrenia and thinks all her hallucinations are real, but others can talk about their experiences. Story 46. Had a very close friend that was schizophrenic. I knew that he went to the mall a lot, but at first I didn't think much of it. One day, when he was having a good day, I asked what he did there all day. He would walk around the mall with his headphones and music on. As he was doing this, he's reading the mouths of people that walk by, but he isn't actually reading them. It's his hallucinations that make him think that these people are talking to him. When he's reading the mouths, it's God sending him messages through these people's mouths. Every message has something to do with his life and making decisions and even playing into more delusions. I know it was probably even more complex than I can even imagine, but he honestly believed this. Sadly, my friend walked off the roof of the home he was staying at last year. It was sad knowing that he passed like that, but a part of me knew that he was finally free from his mind and he's in peace now. Story 47. I have a reoccurring memory of hitting someone with my car and hiding the body in my garage. This never happened, and I've never had a garage. This was one of the first hallucinations that pushed me get help. Even after years of therapy and medication, I still occasionally feel the pressure and anxiety associated with the event, which never happened. Trust me when I say, I have researched and confirmed over and over that this didn't happen, even though it feels as real as eating breakfast this morning. Story 48. It started about 3 or 4 years ago. I see vivid auras on people. Some examples are a vivid yellow-orange glow with distinct lines coming off the shoulders. Sometimes it's just around specific body parts, like an arm glowing purple. I've seen floating purple eyes in a star-like shape. Sometimes I can see a line coming off objects like a tree that goes into the sky. Sometimes I get vivid flashes of faces I don't recognize. There are a few other events that I feel like would make this post less believable, like intuitively knowing the contents of packages or knowing I'll find some old bottles hiking. It's more disconcerting than scary. I don't experience paranoia or mania, but I can't focus, and occasionally am fond of pacing. I've debated seeing a professional regarding the issue, but I haven't. Story 49. Obligatory. Not me, but my aunt has paranoid schizophrenia. I don't know the scariest one, but the one that affected the rest of the family. After my grandpa died, her and my mom's father, she moved across the country to be with us and the rest of her siblings. One day she was supposed to come over and never showed, so my mom called her. She said there was a tiger stalking her outside her house, and she couldn't leave because it would eat her. My mom tried to reason with her because it would be all over the news if a tiger had gotten out from the zoo, and there would be police everywhere. That turned into a massive fight between them, and my aunt packed up and moved back across the country without telling anyone. Story 50. I suffered a lot from hallucinations when I was a teenager. My dad is schizophrenic, and I've been told by doctors that I inherited it from him. I remember having hallucinations about a pair of incredibly long arms. They looked like they had been stretched into deformity by some sort of torture. The arms would appear out of dark areas at any time of the day. They moved like snakes, but also like they were examining the surroundings. Sort of like a blind person feeling their way through a room. Whenever the arms got close, I would hear faint moaning, like that of a person in Sirius, but it was mixed with animalistic growling. Story 51. I had amphetamine psychosis, which is indistinguishable from schizophrenia. I thought people were coming to get me as punishment for not taking amphetamine. How would they know that I hadn't taken any? Why would they want to hurt me? I didn't know, but I had such a strong conviction that I didn't feel safe in the house. It was a living nightmare, and I had a delusion that everyone knows how they will end, as if it gets revealed to them poetically in life, and that we're not allowed to talk about it. I believed I would be hitting. I came to this conclusion after believing that I was being watched by a man outside my window in the bushes, while I just sat there for hours. There was no man in the bushes. I was staying up for 5 days at a time, and it took me about 10 months of abstinence to recover from the delusions, anxiety, and depression. Story 52. Not schizophrenic, but do experience hallucinations. I hear my grandfather calling my name and laughing from the room he was in last before he died. It's not like a noise that could be mistaken for a voice. I hear it loud and clear, and it actually sounds like it's coming from that room. When I go in the room, though, I can't hear it anymore, and it frustrates me. I also can see him walking around in the living room when the lights are off. One night, I remember looking downstairs from the top of the staircase and seeing him, staring up with lifeless eyes that were sunken in. When I tried to turn back around, he shook violently before falling to the ground. Very traumatizing to see a few weeks after his passing. Story 53. When I didn't recognize myself in the mirror, I was looking at myself and I started to have these weird thoughts about if I was the person I thought I was, and how I could be sure, since most of the time I'm not sure what I see is real anyway. That spiraled down until finally I didn't even recognize who I was in the mirror. I knew I should know the man there, and I knew it was someone close to me. But I couldn't grasp that it was me. I didn't know who I was. I thought I was just a figment of what my mind told me I was, that all the voices were right, that I was nothing. Story 54. Not schizophrenic. I was in the hospital in the worst pain of my life, so naturally, they give me a substances drip. I had never had anything stronger than ibuprofen, so I had no idea what to expect. I started having a visual hallucination that the ceiling had literally dropped down and was only like 3 inches away from my face. I was laying in my hospital bed in a panic thinking I couldn't sit up, so I got all claustrophobic and absolutely lost my crap. It doesn't sound so bad, but it was horrifying. I felt like I was pinned to my bed, trapped in the little box. The worst part is that I know it wasn't real, but when I remember it, I can still feel that anxiety I had, like it really happened. Story 55. Once my reflection in the mirror started moving on its own and talking to me, it was deeply evil. I was like trapped in my own body, unable to take my eyes off that being in the mirror. Sometimes I feel a presence in the bathroom and I know the being is back. I avoid looking at the mirror at all costs. If I ignore it, it eventually leaves. Schizophrenics of Reddit, what were the first signs of your break from reality and how would you warn others for early detection? First thing was hearing voices of people I knew calling my name when they couldn't possibly be there. Like, I would hear a family member or friend that lives 3 hours away by car. Then I started seeing objects, often while driving. Once on a lonely Nebraska night on Highway 2, a giant radio tower suddenly appeared in front of me in the road, and then dissipated when I drove through it. I also see silhouettes of people occasionally. Worst visual I've gotten was a very real-looking man trying to break into my house during the day, and it freaked me the duck out. Happened twice, also screaming. Story 2. As someone who has schizophrenia, reading all the comments on this thread made me feel about 5,000 times less alone than usual. That being said, for me, it was thinking that all my friends were plotting against me. So much so that I started digging as hard as I could to find as much dirt on everyone as possible. Auditory hallucinations followed that pretty quickly. At its worst, I began misremembering important life events, only to find out years later that what I felt I so vividly remembered to be true was actually not. But I guess that's psychosis for you. Meds, therapy, and a fiance and friends who have your back all work wonders, though. They don't judge me when things get rough. Story 3. My brother suffered from delusions. He never received a diagnosis of schizophrenia. He was extremely adverse to sharing his symptoms in therapy. Hindsight is 20/20, but I believe his initial onset was in his early 20s. He became extremely paranoid, very into conspiracy theory, isolated himself from his friends and family, had very erratic sleep patterns, and had some visual hallucinations involving lights and geometric patterns. He was living alone at the time, so I really can't say exactly how extensive everything was. It then progressed to much more elaborate delusions and erratic behavior as he got older. For what is worth, I know now that schizophrenia is progressive, and outcomes are best when a person receives treatment with the initial onset of symptoms. Story 4. Diagnosed schizoaffective bipolar here. Basically, I have both schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It started when I was 5 years old. I would see dead people, feel the presence of ghosts, smell rust and metals, hear voices and thoughts of other people. As a teenager, I thought I was a psychic. As an adult, I started a job as a psychic medium. I legit thought I could predict the future. One day, I just decided I'm damn crazy and got a psych eval. Been on medication ever since and super grounded. My major triggers are fourth wall breaking video games and TV shows. The Truman Show is also horrifying for me. Story 5. It started with not needing to sleep as much. Countless days of being awake, driving endlessly to pointless destinations, disregarding police authority. Story 6. First sign was, I can hear people from other side of the roads or in other rooms loud and clear, but instead of just whispering about their own conversation, I hear them talk about me, planning to do things to me. Any sounds at not a loud enough volume for me to hear clearly. Turns into a death plot. Second sign was feeling of bugs crawling on me at all time. Of course, when I look, there's no bugs there and the feelings go away. But this often keeps me up at night. I was convinced there was thousands of insects at all time on my skin. Third sign was the need to run away. I skip towns to towns because I have a bad feeling about it. Paranoia, anger, everyone is against me. I would add some additional information towards the substances. Trigger debate below. I thought it might help somebody in questing. Before schizophrenia, I was depressed, bulimic, and always had anxiety. I self-medicate a lot with substances, and even had brief psychosis after prolonged meth usage. But substances wasn't my trigger. In my 20s, I got married and then divorced, and the stress of it was what brings my adult onset to life. I have stopped using at that point. Schizophrenia is completely different with a substances-induced psychosis, and I know different people have different triggers, but if you think you might have some symptoms of schizophrenia, I suggest you stay far away from stress as much as possible, because that's what happened to me. Therapy helps a lot of people, but it didn't help me. I don't like to talk about it. I don't know if it was the great distrust I have in people, or whatever reasons. I just feel like I suffer twice when I talk about it. I used to be very open with people and therapists when it was just depression, but now I keep everything to myself because I just want to forget. I am terrified of substances now because of what might happen, so I have not used any since my diagnosis. But I drink heavily, and it helps me in a strange way. Make me get through the day. I see a question, ask if I can tell what is real and what is not, and the answer is no. I went through a period of time of being cyberbullied, doxxed, and stalked after my diagnosis, and from it I am now scared of cell phones, doorbells, mails, interactions in general. I believed it was real, but who knows? I don't. One of the saddest things about being a schizo is how life-changing it is, and things changing is a trigger for most schizophrenic. It is a complete dark merry-go-round. I used to have a great job. I used to have people who loved me. I used to travel the world. Everything that was good for me, leave me, or I ran away from it. When something positive comes to me, I thought, I am here, but I am not the person supposed to be here, and I damn it. It spirals, and you are so scared, but you can't help yourself. And yes, schizophrenia get worse, all the time. You thought you get used to it, and then new craps show up. I have given up on meds because there is no true cure, just mere comfort. It just makes me binge eat, get fat, and then comes the worsened bulimia and body dysmorphia. Can't look at my own face anymore. The only things that helps is silence, laying in the dark, and try to forget. Story 7. Schizophrenia runs in my family, but I haven't been diagnosed. Not that I go to the doctor, and the symptoms all stopped suddenly about half a year ago. But it started off with physical hallucinations. Small stuff like the feeling of spiders on me, but then it grew to feel like I'm covered in spiders. Then the feeling of a rope around my neck choking me. I started hearing voices whispering gibberish in my ear. These were inconvenient, but didn't really mess with my life. But one morning I woke up because I heard a beep. The first thought in my head was, the damn aliens put a device to record me, and spent about an hour looking for it before I realized I was being crazy. This happened a bit for a couple of years. Then suddenly it stopped. Not sure why, but I'm glad. Story 8. My mother, father, and college roommate all had schizophrenia. In the case of both of my mother and roommate, their first signs early on was hearing their name being called and no one was there. More voices came from my mother, and eventually visuals. My roommate started feeling things on her, then delusions, and every possible kind of hallucination. I don't know what the first signs were for my father, but earlier delusions were that he thought he was on a game show and that he was being watched by the CIA. I'll add more here for clarity. First comma. My roommate was feeling touches and insects on her. The feeling of insects is probably common. She would also see spiders, flies. She had an unusually quick progression and would hallucinate demons and sometimes flat out dissociate and go into something like a bad acid trip involving demons. My mother is currently medicated, but still hears demons talking to her. She is highly religious now. She also, apparently, hears the voice of one of her previous miscarriages, which she says is comforting. During the day, she is very functional. But when she doesn't take medication, she gets bad, and her symptoms worsen at night. Voices tell her what to do. Don't drink wine. She told me she was moving to Brazil to find treasure. She told me my father would turn into a winged demon, fly around, and beat her. He probably did beat her. My father was mostly delusional, and he thought he was being watched by the government or aliens or anything. This was in common with my roommate, who thought she was being watched by government, alien satellites, and would cover the windows with foil. My dad doesn't speak much about his symptoms, but has told me he remembers traveling through time to watch my mother get abused as a child with the help of aliens. A lot of you wondered how I am. I'm okay. One risk factor was that my parents were pretty big addict for a while, but at least my mother's symptoms started before all of that. As mentioned, she was also abused as a kid, so this could have contributed. Story 9. Careful worrying too much about auditory or visual hallucinations, though. You can get both of these from something as simple as really bad sleep deprivation. I've been there, and while that's also pretty unhealthy, it's not as big of a concern as other issues. Also, just like your eyes try to find faces and images, I think sometimes you can hear your voice in random noise. Story 10. One of my husband's good friends was never formally diagnosed, but we're almost certain he had some form of paranoid schizophrenia. He began to be very paranoid about anything when his symptoms first started. He believed a lot of conspiracy theories, like crazy ones about aliens invading, and that a group of aliens from space were watching his every move. On one occasion, he and my husband had gone to a coffee shop together, and after about 45 minutes, the friends started to tense up and talked about how another man in the shop was a secret agent sent to spy on him. Instead of saying something like, "Nah man, everything's fine. You're overreacting," my husband grabbed his friend's hand and said, "Man, that sounds terrifying. Let's get out of here and go to another shop instead where you'll feel more safe." I'd tear up a little bit just thinking about it. He was a completely normal guy until his symptoms started around age 23, with the exception of having some depression and probably being an alcoholic. He was an incredibly smart guy, but last year he hit himself. He had been largely abandoned by his friends for being too weird, and he didn't have much going for him when he had to move back home with his parents. But I'll always remember how kind and compassionate my husband was to him in those last months. His parents were also not very helpful and kind of brushed off his weird mannerisms, and so they didn't try to get him help. My first indication that he had become schizophrenic were his really cryptic Facebook posts that he'd make. They just seemed a little off. Nothing that would make you scream, "Oh my gosh, I think he's schizophrenic." They were just much different to things he'd normally post. Story 11. I started smoking substances heavily when I was 17 years old. Eventually, I thought that an angel named Satan, yes, the Satan, visited me. I basically hallucinated him inside of my head and found him charismatic, charming, and awesome. I was having conversations with who I thought was Satan. Yes, again the Satan. But I didn't think he was evil. I thought he was a pretty angel. I made my own Ouija board to try and communicate with Satan and other beings. I was told through the board that I was the world's chosen Messiah. I would just use my point finger and it would move on, its own. I believed every bit of it and thought I was Satan's chosen Messiah, and that the world was going to come to an end. I told a bunch of people this, and I even got a girlfriend while I was claiming to be Satan. Not joking. I thought I had superpowers, related to energy, and could heal diseases and perform miracles. When I eventually told my parents of my revelation, they called a local priest on me to basically talk to me and exorcise me. I cursed him in the name of Satan, and he left, very scared. I eventually was taken to a mental hospital by my parents, and then I lied to all of the mental hospital people. I told them that I was just a normal guy and my parents were uptight Christians. Truth is, I was batcrap insane. I lied to everyone at the mental hospital and they let me out 3 days later. At this point, I made peace with my parents and I stopped sharing my delusional thoughts. Eventually, the delusions disapparate on their own. Some things I did under delusions. Stayed awake for days with substances and played the Ouija board. The Ouija board said that I would win the lottery, no doubt, so I convinced my friend at the time to play lottery tickets with me. I remember how disappointed we were when all we won was like enough to buy a pack of cigarettes after playing all different types of lotto. I tried to summon demons using a ram's horn and tried to make creepy puppets. It weirded me out, so I threw the skull into the woods somewhere at a homeless camp. I convinced at least 3 other people of my delusions. I basically made my own delusional cult at the age of 19 or so. I won't reveal anything about them, obviously, but still. I then convinced a girl that I met online that I was the Messiah and we had a horrible relationship for 1 year. Thought that muffins were communicating messages to me secretly because I was the Messiah. I laid on hands a mentally disabled guy at my workplace and thought I healed him of his sins. He thanked me. Had a sit-down talk with a member of a Catholic church, whom I was trying to deceive somehow. So yeah, if you're 16, 17, stay away from psychedelic substances. It might send your schizophrenia into high gear by 18, 19 like it did for me. It feels good to get it off my chest. None of this is a joke. I've never told anyone this. Story 12. My boyfriend was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. The first signs, I believe, were hearing or sensing beings in his room while he was going to sleep. The first ones I heard about as they happened was he would see something out of the corner of his eye. There was a baboon in the lab. But then, when he would turn to look directly, he would realize it was a student. Later, there were a lot of obsessive behaviors, burning off freckles thinking they were cancerous, boiling a toothbrush to nothing if it fell on the counter, making me repeat reassuring words repeatedly for hours. I eventually broke up with him, which prompted his schizophrenic break. Hundreds and hundreds of pages of emails detailing how he was going to hit me. He believed he was sent from God, and me from the devil, and he had to destroy me. He left disgusting messages on my family's home phone about me, stalked me, and later found out he made a webpage about me. Good news is years later, he is doing well, though he still suffers a lot and is not happy. He has a fantastic job, wife he adores, great house, etc. Story 13. Not schizophrenic, but bipolar, which has led to psychosis. For me, it started with derealization and depersonalization and escalated from there. I wasn't real, and the world wasn't real led to seeing spiders all over the walls and thinking that aliens were trying to hit me and I had to hit them first. A friend was concerned and had the police do a welfare check, and I tried to stab the cop with a large knife because I thought he was an alien. That crap is scary. Once they got me into the hospital and got me some treatment, I did much better. I'm actually off all my meds now and doing pretty good as far as my delusions. But my life is also in a much better place. There is hope. Story 14. I'm not schizophrenic, but I developed psychosis, which, from what I understand, is pretty much temporary schizophrenia. I started thinking I was going insane for no particular reason. Just felt like I was kind of losing it for some reason. I constantly had the recurring feeling that my front teeth were loose and would fall out. I started randomly engaging in creative writing on Reddit, which I believed was much deeper and more profound than it was. I spent a lot of time fixating on these philosophical ideas that I thought were revolutionary, and I would walk around feeling like I was working on some profound puzzle in my head. But I don't think I was necessarily thinking of anything in particular. I just felt like I was. I checked my pupils constantly to see if one was dilated because I heard in a nursing class I took in high school that it's a sign of severe mental illness, which, as I said, I felt like I was developing. I started seeing lots of patterns in speech and text, like I was extracting some deeper meaning from it. I started thinking I was becoming enlightened and that I was a genius. I had random flashes of visual snow. Eventually, I suddenly had a hallucination after I wrote one of my crazy creative writing things. It's pretty shocking how quick it went from 0 to 100. One day I was just unhinged. Then I posted a creative writing thing on Reddit, and suddenly I thought the government was targeting me because I posted something really profound. The next day I thought people in my college class were talking about me when they were just having normal conversations. A few days later, I thought I was being mind-controlled and started having conversations with a voice in my head that I thought was a CIA operative who was interviewing me about the crap I posted on Reddit. It's pretty nefarious how much it can completely change your perception of reality. You can have thoughts like suspecting you're losing your mind while simultaneously engaging in crazy crap that seems completely sane to you. It can also really duck up your memory to the point that you can completely forget that you thought you were going crazy for months and just start believing you're being mind-controlled and talking to the CIA. Your delusions can convince you of one thing for a while, then you just disregard that completely and start believing something else that's equally or more crazy. Your state of mind and perception can be altered in profound ways comparable to LSD. All sorts of little coincidences or things that seem like coincidences can reinforce your delusions and make you believe they must be true. You can't just snap out of it. It becomes a part of your world, and you're constantly looking for things that reinforce your delusions. And many of those things are only in your head. Hallucinations extend beyond just seeing and hearing things to actually feeling, tasting, or smelling things. At one point, the voices were punishing me, and it felt like I was on fire, like an actual full-body sensation of being burned that made me keel over. They also made me feel perpetually, unbearably uncomfortable unless I positioned myself in particular ways. Thoughts and images were inserted into my head. I had recurring images of being abused by my father, inserted into my head that were accompanied by tactile hallucinations of being felleted, along with sort of pseudo-visual hallucinations that I can't really describe. It was all very traumatizing. I still often question how sane I am because I know I wouldn't even notice it if I started losing my mind again. The strangest thing is how much it can seem like a voice in your head is a real, thinking person. Early on, before they started torturing me, I even fell deeply in love with one of the voices. It's also like your emotions can be manipulated, so it's hard to say that those feelings of love weren't themselves a kind of hallucination or delusion. I still have images of being abused by my father and very mild tactile hallucinations that cause me to close my legs and cover my genitals. I also still have voices on occasion. It's been about 2 years now, so it could be schizophrenia, I guess, but my psychiatrist hasn't indicated that. Story 15? I was just about to turn 18 years old and doing a lot of substances. At the end of this trip was a crippling depression. A couple weeks went by and I just went crazier and crazier. I think it was the depression. I seemed to be fine before this, depressed and anxious and a young insomniac, but nothing seriously crazy or nearly this intense. Now it's hard to tell when you're crazy because it seems damn normal. Taking a cigarette and leaving it in a glass of water out in the sun to drink it as a tea and gain spiritual superpowers sounds crazy as crap. But damn, after that trip, it was a walk in the park. I thought I was God and could change dimensions at will. And the scariest thing was, I almost could. I would feel sensations that are very hard to describe. An example would be my thoughts would spiral up like a radio tower through my head and float above me, or I felt a giant winged bug instead of lungs for a couple seconds. It sounds crazy, but I really physically felt sensations like this. I spiraled out of control and ended up in jail and rehab. Didn't do anything else besides smoke weed and cigs for a year after that trip. I could write a trilogy on my experiences in jail and the 3 court-ordered rehabs I ended up in. It was wild. Tons of abuse. It was very confusing and really made my mind warp bad for a while. Eventually, after 6 months, I got to this point where I would be okay 90% of the time and then have a bad week. Eventually, I got home and then got diagnosed with bipolar, got antipsychotics, and that helped a bunch. Later on, and I'm officially diagnosed as bipolar and schizoaffective. I'm 23 now, haven't had a serious break of reality for a couple years now thanks to an antipsychotic I take consistently. I've gone off it in the past and had episodes after some time. It seems like I had warning signs before that bad trip, but I'm sure my episodes wouldn't be as bad without that trip I had. I'm in no way discouraging proper and safe psychedelic use unless you have a family history of concerning mental health. They really did help me an immense amount before I had that experience. Now it's too risky. So there's one huge thing that I didn't do during that big episode. I didn't tell anyone what I was experiencing. I kept it to myself, and I think that's why everything spiraled so far out of control. I definitely was paranoid then, and that might be part of the reason, but kinda didn't want anybody to know and thought it would just blow over, like a hangover or something. It didn't, and it got worse. So if you're worried about your mental health, talk to someone you trust about it. Story 16. My heart hurts saying this. My mother often asks me to come to her room and if I can hear what she hears, but it's all silent. It's hard to get diagnosis and no one wants to label it. I'd say early symptoms would be hearing noises, nervous laughter out of context, and perhaps talking. shouting back to voices that aren't around. Story 17. Disclaimer. It's hard to say if this was caused by schizophrenia or something else, as I was incorrectly diagnosed with something else and had a poor reaction to the meds. Or more accurately, had a poor reaction to quitting the meds because I didn't like the side effects. Anyways, I became convinced that the universe was a Matrix-like simulation and that I was some kind of main character, if you will, and that I wouldn't face any negative consequences for my actions since I was destined to win. I stopped going to my job, but I didn't mention it to my fiancé. I'd just head out in the morning and go around for 8 hours. I'd had a fairly conservative upbringing and had only had sex with my fiancé, which I decided wasn't fair, so I set about trying to duck as many women as possible. I slept with about 5 women during this episode, and at the time felt zero remorse because, hey, I'm the star of the show, and since I want to do it, that makes it okay. In retrospect, it's probably good that my deluded self didn't decide hitting people for fun or something was a good way to test out life without rules. I also sometimes think back to my behavior during that time and question things like self-identity or the idea of a set personality. In my normal state, I'm a somewhat quiet and unassuming guy, but deluded me was a charming, confident devil who took risks and always knew what to say to women. Kind of scary, honestly. This all took place over the course of just under a month, a couple of weeks to decide this was all a joke, and that following the rules was for suckers. Then 2 weeks of not going to work and sleeping around. Obviously, my fiancé found out and left me, and my parents forced me to go back to the psychiatrist after that. Thanks, Dad. The warning signs were the pretty typical sudden shift in worldview and erratic behavior, but I was really going out of my way to hide it. But yeah, if your friend or family member goes from deeply religious to atheist seemingly overnight, or vice versa, and they undergo a drastic change in behavior, particularly if it's for the worse, that's bad news. The good news is that the proper meds, mindfulness, and having a fairly rigid and disciplined lifestyle allow me to lead a pretty normal life. So that's nice. Story 18. The first sign for me was seeing 2 of my best friend in her house when I came over. Not like in a friendly way, like this is a damn doppelganger and it will eat me kind of way. There were several times during the middle of the night I would get so freaked out by them I'd call my parents, this was in elementary school, to pick me up, and we lived a city away. During high school, I would start having trouble with sleep, oversleeping to the point of falling asleep in class and standing up in the halls and not sleeping sometimes for days. Then I'd start to hear my name being called randomly, and it would make me jump at how sudden it was. And I started thinking something paranormal was stalking me, and I'd hear creaks and bumps and footsteps in the house, and the smell of dead things when no one was home. Senior year, I started detaching from my friends, and I got more irritated at things. A year after high school, I went into an episode where I thought that thing was in my house and really trying to hurt me this time, and I ran out of the house and through the streets, convinced that anyone that came into sight was there to get me. When that ended, I realized, hey, that's not normal. Something's off. But I still didn't do anything until about half a year into working at my job. I was getting burnt out fast, because I kept thinking my clients could hear my thoughts and would follow me home after my shift ended. Moral of my story is if you're in high school and you have a sudden change, that feels like depression, but also is coupled with very fantastical thoughts, and you catch it. That's when you need to go check it out. If you're in your 20s and you start hearing your name being called more frequently than the normal person might, you definitely need to get checked out, because that can escalate very quickly into hearing voices full on. Story 19. Unusual beliefs. I didn't have hallucinations, but I had delusions. I had to cover up my webcam on my laptop because I believed I was being spied on through it. That was probably the first sign. I then took the batteries out of my smoke detector, because I believed my smoke detectors had hidden microphones in it listening to me. I became convinced I was tracked online. Soon, I started getting hidden messages in music and videos. Like I thought music videos made by celebrities were about me and communicating to me messages. Like Bad Blood was a celebrity mad at me. A video by Katy Perry about birthdays made me think she was trying to tell me of an upcoming economic collapse. I believed they were hidden messages for my eyes only. Soon, I believed people were out to get me, out to hit me. People walking in the same direction as me on the street were following me, and I was hospitalized multiple times. I wanted it to stop. I wanted to die. I drank bleach, doused myself in gasoline, ECT. There was no talking me out of my delusions. I believed them 100% as if they were a religious belief. They weren't logical either. Even when I would admit that I couldn't prove what I believed, I still believed it and thought everyone else was wrong. For 3 years, I was delusional. I watched old game shows 12 hours a day because I only newly made commercials and videos had hidden messages for me. Finally, over this last summer, it cleared up. I could finally see clearly that I was delusional, and only then did I accept my diagnosis as schizophrenic. Schizophrenics, what is it like to have schizophrenia? It's damn agony. At every stage of your life, it will make you suffer. I've very recently gotten on medication. Over the course of 2 years, I finally managed to find medication that work very well. The side effects aren't that bad, at least compared to the medications before. Anyways, I think the worst part is that it will cause you to act in ways that nobody will ever understand. You will fully believe things that are completely nonsensical. Paranoid episodes are horrific. Imagine feeling like everyone is trying to hit you. I mean that literally. I know that phrase gets tossed around a lot, but actually try and picture it for a second. Have you ever been running from someone you thought was out to get you? Literally picture that at every corner you see someone that feeling comes. That feeling of fear is horrible, but it's made so much worse by how people react. My parents couldn't tell what I was feeling. I thought that if I told anyone about the hallucinations or the crazy conspiracies I thought were real, I would pass. So I would hide when I started panicking. I would try to hide it, and my parents would make me panic so much more. The way that it cripples you socially is one of the worst elements of it to me. And that social isolation will just add more and more legitimacy to your delusions because nobody is there to tell you that it's crazy. I was always in a state of constant alertness because of stupid things I was afraid of. When I finally started coming out about it, I was met with tons of resistance and claims I was lying. It really damn hurts to come out about your problems and get hate for it. The way it makes your head race is just painful. Staying up all night thinking I was in danger, overthinking everything, hearing things that aren't there and being convinced it was real. Then there's what they call delusions of grandeur, where you think you're powerful or genius or supernatural. These make you do crazy crap, often extremely dangerous and ungodly embarrassing later on in life. Just a note for everyone out there, please. When somebody comes out about it, please be patient, don't panic, and accept that this is really happening. Schizophrenia is not just a thing in music and movies, it is a real thing in the real world, and it really damn hurts. I'm sure I could explain this better if I took a little more time for it. This is a really rough explanation, getting a bit emotional about it. But yeah, it damn sucks. I've heard people say, I wish I was schizophrenic. Yes, I've actually heard that said before, and it's the most insulting thing I've ever heard. Story 2, it's not fear, it's knowledge. You're not worried your friends are plotting to hit you. You know your friends are plotting to hit you. Even when you know you're having a delusional episode, you're still convinced the worst thing you could ever imagine is happening. There's no way to shake it. Story 3, I didn't have hallucinations, but I had delusions. You think you've discovered something very important, and it's obvious that it's true. You're a skeptic, so you carefully analyze all the evidence looking for any potential bias on your part or alternate explanations for the phenomenon you've observed. Everything adds up. It all makes perfect sense every time yet when you mention these things to other people. None of the people around you seem to come to the same conclusion as you. Sometimes they say, I don't know why that happened. So what? Sometimes they have a mundane explanation for how some pattern might have emerged. Yet it's difficult to believe other people are really expressing what they think. Because the obvious thing you have observed is so obvious that it seems inconceivable that the people around you don't see it the way you do. It's such an obvious thing that it seems more likely to you that everyone around you is lying when they say they don't agree with you. It seems more likely that they are actually conspiring to trick you in some way, because there must be some explanation for why they are claiming nothing extraordinary is going on. You would just ignore it and go on with your life, but it's not a trivial thing you've been noticing. If everyone was saying the sky is green and you saw it as blue, you could shrug and move on without it affecting your life. But the things everyone around you seems to be pretending to ignore are really important. The songs on the radio are always about what you did recently and contain veiled messages, sometimes threats. Other times reminders that you are always being watched 24 hours a day. Other times requests for help. The celebrities on TV and YouTube talk about you without saying your name. You're afraid to say anything wrong or do anything wrong because you are convinced the people who watch you will punish you for making one wrong move, just as they always do. Sometimes you wonder if you're crazy, so you disobey the people who watch you. You go for a walk without checking the radio or TV to see if it's okay. Or maybe you decide to tell someone a government secret they communicated to you and asked you to not reveal. The people who watch you get angry, very angry. They play a song whose lyrics are, one way or another, we're gonna find you, we're gonna get you, followed by Only the Good End Young, followed by Jump by Van Halen. You rack your brain for some other interpretation other than they are promising to torture and hit you in the future for your disobedience, and that your best option is to find a tall building and jump off. There doesn't seem to be any other way those songs could be played together in that order. Die does seem to be the only way to avoid the inevitable torture. You always feel like you are on the verge of figuring it all out. You don't know why so many people, including celebrities, chose to obsess over you, or why everyone around you is in on it, and lying about what they see. But you are always just so close to understanding why you were chosen and what everyone wants you to do. Somehow, you're going to save the world. You were warned of economic bubbles causing an economic collapse soon, and a violent revolution soon to follow. Do they want you to lead the revolution? Prevent it? What purpose could there be in locking you up in a psych ward every couple weeks? What purpose in the threats or hiding messages in plain sight? Such uncertainty about some things, yet other things there is no doubt whatsoever. Then, for me, as quickly as it set on, it goes away. Songs are just songs again. TV shows are just shows. Nobody cares about you anymore, much less wants to hit you. The notebooks you wrote your thoughts in are now easily identified as incomprehensible gibberish. You understand why everyone around you was worried and why they didn't reach the same conclusions. Because only now can you see that you were illogical and delusional. You feel safe knowing nobody ever hurt you physically. And the family members who end of natural causes, as the doctors said. You feel embarrassed at your complete lack of sanity and ashamed for accusing people around you of lying and conspiring against you. You feel free, unmonitored. At long last, you have your sanity back. And yet, you know if you ever lose it again, you will be the last to know. Story 4. I have bipolar-type schizoaffective disorder. Here's what a normal day is like for me. Walking into a room and suddenly have the feeling of being in a horror movie. Horrible, creepy music playing in the background. The room darkens. Goosebumps pop up all over your skin. Your heart pounds so fast you think you might have a heart attack and pass. You know they're coming. They're going to appear any minute and hit you. But you can't move. You're frozen. Minutes pass, feeling like hours. Finally, the lights go back to normal. The music stops playing, and the fear is immediately gone as reality hits you square in the face. You shake your head, shrug, and go get that cup of coffee you intended to get earlier. You're minding your own business. It's late at night and you're washing dishes. You happen to glance for a second outside. The moon suddenly becomes larger than the planet. You stop washing dishes. The moon becomes an eye, a big, ugly eye, and it's staring at you. It's not blinking. It doesn't have eyelids. You open your mouth to scream, but then it's gone. Everything is as it was. You're talking to your best friend. You're having a good time as you both catch up on what's happening in each other's lives. Suddenly, she smiles at you and calls you a dirty, disgusting, filthy escort, and she never wants to see you again. You blink, confused. What? You scream. Your best friend looks at you, even more bewildered than you are. I didn't say anything. You walk down the street. There are a lot of people out today. Your insecurities increase with your every step. It feels like everyone is staring at you. You can hear them whispering about you. You turn to your partner that's beside you and express your desire to call the people who are talking about you out. Your partner looks at you, unsure, and says, "Babe, no one is talking about you." You're having sex with your partner. You're into it, enjoying the pleasure. Then, you hear them say, "I'm sorry," in a high-pitched little kid's voice that immediately turns you off. You chose not to say anything until after you both have finished. When you ask your partner about it, they almost fall out of the bed in shock. They didn't say that at all. You're trying to sleep and finally close your eyes for the night. As soon as you close your eyes, you see the face of a clown mere millimeters from your face. He smiles menacingly, showing his fangs. You quickly open your eyes. Nothing is there. You sigh and close your eyes again. The clown is there, so close to your face that you can see right into the fiery infernos where his pupils are supposed to be. You open your eyes again, angry that this is happening. It's only after 2 hours of trying to sleep does the clown finally disappear and you can rest. And that's only a few examples of real-life experiences I've had to deal with firsthand. This crap is no joke. All my hallucinations are damn scary, and I envy people who have delusions of grandeur or have pleasant hallucinations because at least theirs is enjoyable. My brain likes to make me live in a nightmare while I'm damn awake, and then give me real nightmares when I sleep. I don't really get a break from scary crap. Story 5. It took me a while to get my actual diagnosis for schizophrenia, because unlike other schizophrenics, I can tell when I'm hallucinating. I also know that it isn't real. Most people would think this is a good thing, but I honestly sometimes think it might be even worse than it would be normally. I cannot explain the sheer frustration of seeing the hallucination, knowing it isn't real. But you still see it, and no matter how much you know it isn't real, how much logic you throw at the problem, there is still some part of you that does think it's real, because you're seeing it right. But you know it isn't real, and I even get proof it isn't real by using the phone camera trick, but that doesn't ever make me feel better. It just makes me feel more frustrated. So I had the joy of experiencing the horror of terrible hallucinations while simultaneously somehow knowing it isn't real, and my brain is screaming, "It isn't real," and I would get so frustrated I'd cry. Honestly, I think that frustration drove me more insane than the hallucinations ever did. I realize I repeated myself a lot in that paragraph, but I don't know how else to describe just the sheer, unadulterated frustration I went through. Still do technically, but I rarely hallucinate now. I would also hallucination more or less often depending on my mood. Besides those two things, when it comes to everything else, my symptoms are the stereotypical norm. Delusions are the worst, and I'm so glad that therapy has pretty much destroyed them for me. For my entire life, I believed I was a monster. I was so damn firm in this belief and had, perceived and sometimes actual, validation from the entire world that this was fact. The medical outpatient staff were so confused by the fact I had such a firm belief in this because I was apparently one of the most well-behaved kids. Even my parents didn't get it, and we weren't even getting along well at that time. It was one of the biggest issues my therapist had to work me through. It took so damn long for me to break the delusion that I was an evil, awful, horrible monster. Even when my therapist pointed out I did good things, I justified it. Somehow my logic doesn't make sense to me now that I've had therapy. Dissociation was my second biggest issue. I dissociated always, for as long as I can remember. People will talk about how the first time they dissociated, they were freaked out afterwards. I never experienced that because I couldn't remember a time when I wasn't hallucinating. A combination of schizophrenia, abuse, and unhealthy home environment caused me to do it constantly. I was, however, freaked out the first time I wasn't dissociating. This won't make much sense to most people, but I was looking in a mirror and realized my reflection was me. I don't really know how to explain it since, logically, I obviously knew my reflection was me, but that I just looked in the mirror and thought, this is me, this is my body, I'm here, that's me. I was so distanced from my body and self that when I was getting better and learning to like myself, I guess that's what stopped me from doing that. I guess just looked in the mirror and suddenly all the information crashed into me at once and I was there. Actually there, in my body, not a spectator. It's hard to describe if you've never dissociated. Thanks to about roughly 3-4 years of therapy now, I'm pretty normal now. I still hallucinate occasionally, but they're always benign, nothing scary. I don't have delusions. Or if I do, they get shot down so quickly by the mental tools I learned in therapy that I don't even clock them as delusions since they're gone so fast. I also haven't dissociated in a long while. My biggest issue now is something bad happened and I found I'm now really distant from my emotions so I can't be hurt again. I hope to fix that once I get back to therapy again. So overall, thanks to medicine and years of therapy, I'm doing pretty good. Story 6. I will be so detached from reality. Nothing feels real. And I'm always convinced that no one will be able to bring me back, and no one is real. I see people that aren't there. We have conversations. I hear voices that aren't there, some nice and some mean. I have a voice that just spews out racial slurs at everyone I look at. It's honestly hell to have because there is such a bad stigma, and everyone expects you to carry on during an episode. But you can't. It's almost impossible because you can't block things out or control what you believe. Story 7. Hi. I have schizoparanoia disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. I guess it depends on the day if you want cliché. Growing up, I, like a lot of my family members, have awful crippling anxiety. But something was just a little off with me. I would worry myself into panic situations that my grandparents were saying I was not good enough, or that my aunt thought I was too loud, and my cousins were talking about how stupid I was. All of these sound a little frivolous to most, but at 5 years old, I took it to heart, and it really messed with me. I used to hear people calling my name, and I would get really frustrated and think my family was playing jokes on me, taunting me and laughing behind my back. Again, being at such a young and vulnerable stage in life had a greater impact. I always felt out of a loop with the people around me, my family, the other kids at school, and in public. I didn't go out of my family home a lot as a child and young teen because of this. A lot of the children I went to school with thought I was weird because I preferred to stay alone during activities and had no interest in making friends. Seriously, I made my first friend when I was in the 3rd grade. When I was in 1st grade, my grandmother had enough and invited all the girls in my class over for a slumber party. I hated it. I thought they had gotten all in on this calling my name bit. The kids had to be sent home because I went into such a fit. My family always assumed I just had anxiety like they did, and that there wasn't another problem. In fact, I would not be diagnosed until I was 19 years old. When I went to college, it became one of the most depressing and debilitating year of my life. I had a private dorm room. On a floor of people I didn't know, and I always felt like they were out to get me, that they were talking about me, that they knew me. Dispute the fact I hadn't made very many friends. Because of all this, and also being 200 miles from home, caused me to become a serious shut-in, I stopped going to class, calling home. I seriously had myself convinced at one point that the kids in my dorm had access to my phone records, eating regularly and sleeping. Finally, it got to the point I couldn't handle it anymore, and I crawled to the top of my dorm building. Ara saw me go up there, and when I wouldn't respond to her, she called 911. I was coaxed down, restrained for safety. AD spent the next 3 weeks in a hospital. After all was said and done, my family brought me back to our home, and I have been receiving treatment since. I'm 22 now, And living with my fiance now, sometimes it's a struggle and my brain gets the best of me. But therapy and medication have helped a lot. It's not what the TV makes it out to be. I'm not a freak or crazy. I just have more obstacles than others. Story 8. Well, for starters, and I'm positive, many people with schizophrenia could relate. It sucks. For one, it's a very broad mental health issue that unfortunately millions of people suffer from, which could vary substantially from person to person. The main trigger for me was smoking, and not until 5 years after I began did I quit the habit, which I loved very much. Don't get me wrong, it ducked me up eventually due to heavy use, but that doesn't mean I can't appreciate its many redeeming medical qualities. Whenever I'd smoked one, it felt like the whole room was closing in on my head. Every thought was like an icicle being twisted inside my brain. People's faces would distort, and everything in my vision would have this malicious fuzz to it. I would hear things that weren't there. You could put me in a soundproof room, and I would feel like I was in an office listening to a dozen people having a conversation directed at me. Some positive, but mostly negative things. I thought everyone was plotting to hit me, spying on me, watching my every move, anticipating what I was going to do next. And these plots were so complex and grand, they'd make compilations of conspiracy websites look like a plebs drafts. I literally thought I was famous. Like the president on the other side of the world tailored his speech subliminally about me. All of this had such a venomous theme to it. I literally thought the only way out was to hit myself. I would have rather rotted in some hole than spend another day underneath the blue sky. It just confused me to the core why anyone would want to waste their precious resources on me when there was a whole world of people crying out for help. My issues were minuscule in comparison. The worst thing is feeling completely and utterly disconnected from my family and friends. The lens that I view life through is completely different to others. Sometimes I'm not sure if I heard that properly or if my brain is playing tricks on me. If anything is real, or we're living in a simulation where I'm the processing chip. It can be frustrating, not being able to relate to anyone, being socially awkward at times, and being sat in the same room as someone but feeling like you're on different planets. The crushing loneliness of the prison that is a schizophrenic's mind sucks, especially with all the stigma around mental health. Even 3 years on after quitting substances, I still get episodes of extreme paranoia and complete sensory overload. It's bloody exhausting is what it is. So if you know anyone who suffers from this mental condition, go out and do some wholesome crap together. Virtue and human decency shouldn't have a price tag.